Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLerran, are you aware that employees, I'm over here, employees at the EPA were building a record for a 404C process before the agency ever began working on the watershed assessment?
So, again, as I said, I'm aware now that there were employees that had differing points of view on this, and some had the point of view that a 404C action might be appropriate, initiating that action might be appropriate, and others who did not.
And they used taxpayer money to hire a contractor to do this work for the EPA to assess the risk of the Pebble project as part of building this Section 404C process?
So that's a characterization that I would not agree with.
Well, maybe you wouldn't mind looking at the testimony from Phil North. The question said, so I was just want to be very clear, the work that NatureServe, who was the contractor, had already been doing, as you stated, to build the record for a 404C action. That work just became part of the watershed assessment. And Mr. North answered, that's correct. And money was added onto the contract and everything else that was needed to facilitate that. And he answered, right. So he testified that they had already been working with NatureServe. When the assessment came along, they just took the work they'd already done and made that part of the assessment. Are you aware, or were you aware that NatureServe's work on building a record towards the 404C action was then just transferred over to the watershed assessment?
I was not aware of that, and again, the watershed assessment was peer-reviewed, went through a very public and transparent process, so there may have been lots of work that went into that, but again, we stand behind the watershed assessment, feel that it was a very well-done document. And
so you have no problem, that doesn't bother you at all?
So again, I'm not familiar with that. I'd have to look into that.
So if you were to look into it and found out that they had been working on this before the assessment ever began, you wouldn't have any problem with that?
I'd want to determine all of the facts and see what the circumstances were. But
you've already said you don't feel like there's any further investigation needed.
So again, I'm not familiar with that. I just can't make conclusions about that.
So how can you make a conclusion that no further investigation is needed when you're not even familiar with what's going on?
Well, I've answered that's been asked and answered, I'm afraid.
Yeah, but it doesn't make much sense the way it's been answered. And it's already been asked, will you reconsider invoking a 404C process that's public and transparent? But I think the issue is much bigger than that. If we look at what happened here and just take it down to the bare bones, your agency stacked the deck behind the scenes, and they orchestrated a predetermined action or a predetermined outcome. Mr. McLerran, just to be honest, your agency appears to be more of a taxpayer-funded advocacy group than an impartial federal agency. I've only been here a year, but I think back about other testimony we've heard in here about the Gold King mine disaster, where maybe the easiest way to put it was that your EPA employees were scientifically incompetent and they were negligent from an engineering standpoint. They were much more concerned about covering their rears than protecting the environment. When we look at that, and whether there's a mine in Alaska, I really don't care about that. But what I do care about is if you'll screw people over in Alaska or Colorado, you'll screw them over in my state as well. So why should anyone else in America think you or your agency would ever be transparent and fair? And why should we as Congress continue to allow offices like yours to exist and spend taxpayer money on them?
So again, the process we undertook here, which is the one I'm familiar with, was scrupulously fair.
I yield back, Mr. Chairman.